Amidst increasing violence and bloodshed in Iran, Trump says, don't worry about it because I have strong options. I have a lot of good options. I'm not sure good for who, but Trump definitely has them. And lots of actions are taking place inside Iran. And you're seeing just a handful of them here. These kinds of violent looks are happening literally all over Iran, in Tehran and other major cities. This is one of the biggest upheavals inside of Iran in many, many years. And the question is, what's behind this? What's going on? And probably most importantly, what's coming next? And to try and solve that problem for us and try to answer it, we authoritatively, I suspect, we have Alastair Crooke, former British diplomat and MI6 officer. We're going to get into that a little bit more later on. With decades of experience in the Middle East and European security affairs, Alastair was also served as a senior advisor to the European Union. He is also the founder of the Conflicts Forum, which you can find on Substack. Alastair, welcome back to the show. Always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much. A pleasure to join you.
Well, look, let's just jump right into it, because I mean, these images that Gary was just showing a few of there a second ago, this is no joke. This is not just somebody trying to fan something up to make it sound bad. This one certainly looks like it. And that depends on, or even if you're looking at the Iranian media, if you're looking at the regional media or the U.S. media, they all seem to be painting a pretty dire picture. What can you tell us about what is going on? What started these protests in the first place?
Well, I can, but what you're showing is not illustrative of what's happening in this last 2 days. If you go on to Iranian television or any other, you'll see pictures of huge protests in favor of the government and against the demonstrators. Huge in most cities. I mean, there are millions going out and they are demonstrating in favor of the government. So actually what we're seeing is that the demonstrations have largely dissipated. If I may, I'll come back to that and explain why they've dissipated.
Sure.
But, you're now seeing the signs of what it's like in Tehran and other cities, and it's not just in the main Tehran city. If you go to the pictures of the cities in the Azeris cities, I mean, they're not part of Azerbaijan, but they're Azeri too. In other words, a minority in Iran. I mean, they are all demonstrating in favor of the government and of the supreme leader. There are parts of the Kurdish parts of Iran, like Karamanshah, have been the center of some of the protests. But I will explain. It's literally almost a sort of customary every 2 or 3 years. There is another Western attempt to create or provoke a regime change in Iran. The last one wasn't 2 years ago, of course. It was on the 12th of June when Trump, together with Netanyahu, agreed on a shock attack. This was the Israeli attack on Iran, where they decapitated many of the military leaders and also then killed a number of scientists who they said were working on the nuclear program. And that was quite clearly, and it's been admitted even in Israel, this was a regime change attempt. They believed Iran was a house of cards, and that one little push, the decapitation of the commanders, Iran would just collapse. And it would be like Syria. They are fixated on Syria, and that Iran can just follow the path that Syria went down. Well, I mean, you know what condition Syria is in now. It's really terrible. It's a complete mess. There are sectarian killings. There have just had major sectarian killings in Syria, promoted by al-Nusra, which is the group that Jolani used to be connected with, in Aleppo. My wife worked for a number of years in Aleppo, in the refugee camps of Aleppo. And she's seeing many of the Kurds being killed there by the Jolani people, or the former people of Jolani. He was always Nusra. He was ISIS, and then he became Nusra, and then he became whatever he is now. It's not actually a very good example, and Iranians have watched it and seen what happened to Syria and the state fall apart and to descend into sectarian killing. This is what is happening in Iran is very clearly externally organized and constructed, and the elements of it, there are a number of elements, and they're different elements. First of all, there are not many Kurds who are involved in it. Some of these Kurds come from Erbil, across the border there, and some of them have come from Syria, from the forces, the Kurdish forces trained by America in northeastern Syria. They've come in also. Then you have the MEK, Mojahedin al-Khalq, and they are trained by CIA in a camp in Albania. It's about 3,000 of them have been under training for some period, some years, in Albania, as for this job, for this exercise. Then sometimes there's an involvement of the Baluchis, but in this one, there is not. The other thing to say is there is a very close involvement of NGOs operating to Israel and to Western states.
And Alastair, I wonder if you can comment if you've heard anything. I've seen some incidental reports over the weekend that actually there was some movement from the Kurds in Iraq into Iran for the purpose of destabilizing, but the Turkey and Iran apparently work together, whether at the intel level or physical level, to try and thwart that. And that a lot of these actions over the last couple of years altogether has been pushing Turkey and Iran closer together. Can you comment on that?
Well, what you've just said is correct. Yes, there were about 400 that came across. The crossings are monitored quite carefully, and Turkey gave the Iranians advanced warning, intelligence warning, that these were a group of Kurds that were coming along to, if you like, promote regime change in Iran. And I think they've all been either captured or killed, the Kurds. And I just want to say this before we move on, because it's a very important element. We have this mix. There are also the monarchists, but they have very little following in Iran. Monarchists, the Mujahideen al-Khalq, and the Kurds are the main components of this. And they're coordinated. They were coordinated by internet and via NGOs in the place that would give them instructions which city to go to and where to go. Mostly it's been in the smaller cities, not in the bigger cities. And they have a method of operation which is really drawn from the Maidan platform, or the Maidan, if you like, formula, and it's very violent. And so what they do is they go into a city and a small group of men seize an Iranian, a man, a passerby or something, nothing particular, and they start beating him. And they beat him very severely. And then the women who are part of the team are all filming this all the time, filming this from different angles. And then they are encouraging him, say, kill him, burn him. And of course, then when the security forces come and they start firing at these men attacking this Iranian, then people get killed, sometimes innocent people, bystanders. That's the point of it. That's exactly what they want. And that creates a great deal of anger and hostility in the crowd against exactly what you remember in Maidan Square when the snipers went in and fired on the crowd there. And the whole thing erupted, and there was a color revolution that flowed from that action. So that's basically what they are doing. And so the Iranians have really, first of all, the security forces have taken control. The protests pretty well peaked on Thursday night. And in the last 2 days, there have been really almost none in the cities. In fact, what we're having is the opposite. Big, large, massive demonstrations in favor of the government taking place in Tehran. So it's the whole of this is dissipating. And actually, I was going to say to you, is actually collapsing for one very important reason. First of all, the Iranians were, as you probably know, turning off the internet, city by city, as they were tackling these problems. But in the last couple of days, they have succeeded in turning off Starlink. The Western NGOs had smuggled in about 40,000 Starlink terminals for the activists to use to coordinate and prepare the demonstrations against the government. And there were 40,000 of, I think, is the estimate if they are. Now, it started off at 30%. Now, 90% of them are not functioning. They've been completely stopped. And what I believe, I haven't got solid evidence for this, but what I believe is the Iranians have had some help from the outside, and it actually sort of lights up which Starlink terminal is trying to connect to the system. So they go and arrest the person and seize him at that point. So there has been a major shift, a sort of strategic shift in the picture, because the internet is mostly off and now Starlink is off. The internet is not off for the security services. For some time, they've had the ability to cut off, if you like, the non-governmental designated internet service, completely keep it separate from the international one. The international one is cut off. So these people have lost their guides, the directors who have been directing this operation from outside. And that's why you see these pictures, partly because it's largely been collapsing.
So let me ask, is there any genuine domestic case for any of these protests that just naturally has occurred because people are tired of the Mullah regime, or is it exclusively externally imposed? What is your understanding?
Well, there is a background, and yes, there is a real motive for the first, if you like, demonstrations, but they're all connected to the same structure. Because, you know, what are the precursors to regime change? The first one is demonstrations starting out, which happened by coincidence, of course, to start just as Mar-a-Lago talks between Netanyahu and Trump were starting. The demonstration started on cue to the Mar-a-Lago meetings. Then there was a collapse. Then there was a collapse in the rial, and it's gone down substantially, which has caused real dissatisfaction, genuine dissatisfaction, initially amongst the Bazari community, the merchant class. But the merchant class now have turned and are supporting very strongly the government and are very antagonistic to the demonstrators. But initially it was because of the fall in the rial. And that, of course, is easily managed out of Dubai. Dubai is a sort of center for CIA money laundering, for drug laundering, for gold selling and cryptocurrencies. It's, you know, it's one of the black holes in the financial world. And so it's very easy to do an operation of crashing the rial by selling the rial, probably not money that they have, not real that they have, then they buy it back later. You know, but the aim is to crash the currency. So you had, first of all, demonstrations starting that time. Then you had a coincidental crash in the currency. And then if you read the Western press, everywhere there were articles saying, the government is in trouble, it's going to collapse, the supreme leader is sort of about to be spirited out of the country to some safe haven. And all of this is not true. And I would like just to, rather than take my word for it, I want to quote you from the elder statesman of security commentators in Israel, Ehud Yari. I've known him for years, and he's exceptional because he is a real professional, a real intelligence professional, and not one of these modern propagandists that seem to inhabit the intelligence services. And he said, I want to say things that will disappoint not only you, the viewers, but also myself. This was on Hebrew television, Mariv. We in Israel do not see clear cracks in the regime's mechanisms, in the government, nor in its two armies, either the regular or the Revolutionary Guards. We do see dysfunction in the Basij, which is a sort of volunteer group attached to the IRGC. We do not see dysfunction in the Basij. We see signs of hesitation here and there, but nothing more than that. And he spoke of Reza Pahlavi. He is trying but failing to become a guide, someone who guides the uprising, as Khomeini did in his time when he sat in Paris and issued daily orders, and the masses obeyed. Therefore, it must be said honestly, if also sadly, that it will be weeks before we see where this is going. The story is not short.
Well,
so
and actually, that's if it left to their own devices, it may not be. But if it's not left to its own devices, and there is an external forcing function, things could happen a little quicker. Let's run to President Trump, who has said, "Listen, I've got some pretty strong options here on Iran."
On Iran, have they crossed your red line yet to trigger a response?
Well, no, they're starting to. It looks like, and there seem to be some people killed that aren't supposed to be killed. These are violent, if you call them leaders, I don't know if they're leaders or just they rule through violence. But we're looking at it very seriously. The military is looking at it, and we're looking at some very strong options. We'll make a determination. I mean, some of the protesters were killed through the stampeding. I mean, there's so many of them, and some were shot. We get a full report. I'm getting an hourly report, and we're going to make a determination.
So then we're going to make a determination. First of all, just let me ask you, as a former diplomat and someone who's very well versed in international affairs, international relations, international law, is there any justification for the United States or the U.S. and Israel to launch an attack on Iran based on what's happening right now?
None. No, this is, I mean, look, you're mentioning mass demonstrations taking place. Well, Mr. Trump can look to Minnesota if he wants to see mass demonstrations. And, you don't put the army onto the ground, even though that may be happening in these circumstances. So I think even in the United States, people understand, that these are delicate issues. But I would say to you, what I've just told you changes the picture quite a lot. I mean, it may not have percolated through to Air Force One at this moment, but I mean, there's a huge difference, you can imagine, between trying to use armed force against a government that is in the state of dissolution, that it's disintegrating, that it's coming apart, that the army is turning against it, the security forces are defecting. That's one scenario. But what I've just said to you is, and I think it's correct, and that was what Ehud Yari was just saying on Hebrew broadcasting. He said, I'm sorry, it's not happening. It's actually the opposite. And to do it with a government that's coming together. I mean, this is what took place in June. The White House and Netanyahu both thought that the surprise attack, when the Iranians believed that they were about to negotiate with Kushner and his envoy, Witkoff. I mean, on the following Monday, it was all booked up, and then on the Friday, the attack took place. What happened was the expectation from Iran, you can see it, their own security NGOs say, you know, we thought this would collapse the government. And in fact, it didn't. Not only that, it came together very quickly. There was about 24 hours of disorder. New people were appointed. It came together. And what totally surprised the Israelis was that the people supported the supreme leader and supported the country. They turned out massively in support of Iran and against the attack, even though civilian areas were attacked too. So I think, you know, there's a complete difference. I mean, you know, the essence of this round of regime change after the last one, which was about violent demonstrators creating a sense of real danger and anger, has dissipated. Not completely, but it's largely dissipated, and the Iranians are arresting most of them, many of them. And they won't be treated that nicely because they're seen as traitors. So that is the next stage. So what can Trump do? He can come in and bomb sites that he says are connected with the Revolutionary Guards or whatever. But, you know, Iran has been preparing for this.
And that's exactly what I want to ask you about next, because in that lead up to the June attack, as you mentioned there were some big claims by some in Iran that if the United States and Israel were to attack Iran, that they would strike American targets in the region, et cetera. Well, we know that there was only one target attacked and subsequent to that, and by all accounts, I think it was Qatar, that there was a lot of signaling going on, so we knew that it was going to come. We shot down a lot of aging missiles, and then everybody says, okay, we're done. So they really didn't do it. This time, though, Gary, if you could put that full screen up there, they seem to be a little bit more serious about it here. This is, I think, a member of their parliament. Iran says it will, it warns the U.S. that it will retaliate against any attacks. Iran has warned it will retaliate against U.S. military bases and Israel if Iran is attacked again. I'm going to show you what, because Trump was asked about that on Air Force One. I'll get to that in a second. But first of all, do you think that's a credible threat this time?
But you have to put into the context what happened last time. Last time was an agreed attack on Ubaid military base in Qatar. It was the Iranians said they were going to do an attack, and it was allowed, if you like. The America did fire its Patriot missiles. However, the Iranians used a hypersonic missile, and that hypersonic missile took out the main communication and radar center at that military base, Al-Udeid base in Qatar. And that was a demonstration from them of being able to do that without damaging any collateral damage to barracks or people. They just took out the main radar and communication structure of the United States in that base in a very neat exercise. And the attacks then were on Israel. And we've seen a slow, if you like, flow of information from Israel saying just how accurate. Again, they didn't attack civilian areas. The Iranians attacked military targets, and the Israelis, after 4 days, had to ask Trump to try and get a ceasefire. So, the military situation is quite different. Now, other Iranians, they are warning that that will no longer hold. Indeed, when the four, if you like, nuclear bases were bombed by Trump, I think that was on a few days later, in June. Isfahan and the other two bases and that. Now, those there wasn't really. If you look at the videos, and I did look at the videos, there's no firing, there's no anti-air defense fire anywhere across Iran in respect to those attacks, which were mostly Tomahawk missiles, by the way. And there was one passage, because I think the US was quite diffident about sending a B-2 over hostile air defense systems. So the Iranians allowed that largely to happen because they'd removed the 460 kilos of enriched uranium from where it was held in one of those sites, and have put it somewhere else. No one really knows where that is, or at least no one outside of Iran knows where it is. So there was a certain degree of acceptance, if you like. And that's been a pattern that has gone on for some time with the United States, a quiet sort of consultation. You may remember there was an Iranian attack on what's the base called? Al-Azhar base or something like that in Iraq. Again, the Iranians targeted the buildings they wanted to target. No one virtually was hurt, except there was some shock or something. But all the buildings, it was done very precisely and very correctly. So now the Iranians are warning, now we're in a different game. If you attack us now, then all those arrangements, all those agreed things will no longer hold, and we will respond with our missiles.
Now, what is at this point here is a really good spot, because that's what Iran has said. Trump was asked that yesterday, what if they actually do it this time? And here's how he responded.
Iran said that they would consider military and commercial bases as legitimate targets against Trump. Are you concerned
Well, if they do that, we'll consider things targets they wouldn't believe. If they do that, we will hit them at levels that they've never been hit before. And they won't even believe it. I have options that are so strong. So, if they did that, it'll be met with a very, very powerful force.
Do you think Iran takes their threats seriously?
I think so. Don't you think so, CNN? Don't you think so? Wouldn't you say that they probably do at this point? After going through it for years with me, being hit, Soleimani, al-Baghdadi, the Iran nuclear threat wiped out, don't you think, and then you just had Venezuela, don't you think, she says, CNN, do you think they take your threat seriously? Wouldn't you say they do after all of the things we've done?
Now, I'm going to take the two things from that clip. The second one I'm going to take is the last thing he said there, where he was mocking CNN for asking how the audacity to say, do you think they're taking your threat of retaliation seriously? I want to talk about that second, because I think it is important. But let's look first of all at the first one. He's saying that if Iran actually makes good on its threat and we attack them, that they would then spread to those other forces on the map that Gary was showing a second ago. And I can tell you from firsthand experience of having been on a number of those bases while I was on active duty, the air defense there absolutely will not stop a lot of these precision Iranian missiles that you were just referring to there. And there could be profound amounts of damage. In that event, Trump saying, oh yeah, well then I'll go on even more and do a bunch of other stuff. Do you think that Iran would be deterred from that kind of a retaliation because of an expected much bigger strike from the United States that would follow?
No, I don't. I know that sounds sort of paradoxical, but some years ago, I was asked by Iranians to speak to who was then your defense secretary, and explain that actually Iranian defense systems are spread over 57 different sites, I mean different areas, communes, if you like, where the missiles are buried deep in deep underground silos. And they are structured, and we saw this in Lebanon in the 2006 war, that these operate autonomously and can continue to operate even if the capital, even if in that case it was Hezbollah and the command and the communications were taken out altogether. It's a sort of dead hand structure that they will go on and continue to attack Israel, even if the total command structure is taken out. Now, I didn't see.
Let me ask you a follow-up to that. So I think that it can be fairly stated, and you seem to allude to this a second ago, that when the ceasefire in the June so-called 12-day war last year, that all parties had reason for that thing to come to an end. We were expending a lot of ammunition. We didn't want to get into a big war. Israel was taking a lot of hits that they couldn't defend against with the whole integrated air defense system, Iron Dome, David Sling, all that. It still was not stopping a lot of the stuff from hitting major targets in there. And then Iran also had motivation to not be accepting a lot of these, eating a lot of in the teeth, a lot of these Russian, Israeli and American missiles. So they didn't want that then. If they took the risk now to say, all right, if you attack now, I don't care about that. I'm going to get into a long one. Wouldn't they significantly suffer if Trump made good on his initial reaction and then started going in big? And I imagine he probably would. I don't think that's an empty threat. But could they survive that politically?
Oh, as I say to you, first of all, the defenses. I mean, first of all, the other part of it is all of that. The Straits of Hormuz is just honeycombed with Iranian missile sites. They can close off the Hormuz sites very easily. They are in the cliffs alongside the Iranian side of the Hormuz Straits. I've said, secondly, there are 57 different areas, autonomous, with their own missile capabilities, deeply buried. Now, Iran does have air defenses. What happened in that period, in that first round, was that Israel didn't dare overfly Iran directly. If you can find a video of an Israeli plane in Iranian airspace, I will be very surprised. They were standoff cruise missiles that were being fired from Iraq and from Azerbaijan. The ones from Azerbaijan were going straight into Tehran, and the ones from Syria was hitting the west coast, west part of Iran. But they do have air defenses, and I imagine that those air defenses have been much strengthened, possibly by Chinese air defense systems. But the Iranians have air defenses, and they have radar systems. Over the horizon radar systems. And in fact, America and Israel were not able to, or felt secure enough to fly directly into Iranian airspace at that time because of their fear. What did happen at the beginning was that Israel had infiltrated groups into Iran over a period of time, and followed the pattern that we saw in the spider's web with the attacks on the Russian strategic nuclear fleet, with small, if you like, man packs of missiles. In fact, they were anti-tank weapons that they were firing at their localized air defense systems, and it put some of the radars out for a period. And there was a cyber attack from America. And that had an effect, but was corrected within, I think it was 12 hours, and they managed to get it back. It was 12 hours in which Israel this was a sneak attack. I mean, so they were taken by surprise. They thought they were in the middle of a negotiation with America, and found that instead of which they were suddenly being attacked by Israel in a massive way. So they did recover quickly, and then they responded.
Now, one of my concerns is that the second part of that clip I just showed there, where President Trump was asked by a CNN reporter, do you think they take your threat seriously to do that very thing? His response concerns me, because he literally mocked her, and he said, hey, look what I did to Soleimani in 2020. Look, taking out Baghdadi, this 12-day war here, what I just did in Venezuela. Of course they take me seriously. I worry that he thinks, no, nothing will ever happen. Everyone will back down from me, so I can literally do what I want with near impunity. How do you see that?
Actually, the Iranians still are very angry for what happened to Qasem Soleimani. He was a hero. I remember going and giving some talks in Tehran University after his death. And for the young students and postgraduates, he was like a football icon. He was incredible. He was a soldier. And what was he doing? He was on a diplomatic mission to go and meet the Prime Minister of Iraq. He arrived on an airplane, and the official welcoming party from Iraq was there to meet him, to take him to a meeting with the Prime Minister to discuss what else but a peace treaty that would reduce the tensions between Iraq and other states in the area. And then he was killed by missiles on an official. He traveled by a conventional airliner, an ordinary airliner, and arrived as a diplomat. I mean, it wasn't a very heroic, if you like, act. Or Baghdadi. I mean, these are just things that are dressed up. But the point I want to make is, because it's missed so far, and missed in what Trump seems to be saying, is that Iran says that whatever you throw at us, we will double and throw it at Israel. And if you destroy us, you will be destroying Israel at the same time. And as I said to you, they have planned this, and it was Qasem Soleimani who was part of the architects of this. But these underground cities with their missiles, hypersonic missiles, Israel doesn't have any real defenses against it. As you rightly said, they didn't work. They've largely run out of, there's a shortage of air defense material in Israel, because they were firing so much. And still, the hypersonic missiles got through. So, okay, he says, I'm going to threaten you, and I can destroy so many things. Perhaps I'll destroy the mosques and other things like that as well. But the consequences, and this is part of their defensive deterrence system, is, well, to the degree you destroy us, we will destroy Israel.
Now, there is a proclivity for anybody in any country at all to want to use diplomatic means to minimize the threat to them, and to the extent that they can, to mitigate against a stronger adversary to attack them. So they don't want to. They don't want to receive a bunch of these missiles. But there also comes a time in just humanity, and I'd like you to based on your own experience or study, to address this issue related to Iran, that at some point you say, you know what, my mitigation efforts aren't working. My diplomatic efforts aren't working. They just continue to coerce and just bit by bit move out to where they're literally trying now to undermine my political regime itself. And now then they may calculate that, okay, the restraint is no longer working. It's time to engage in a war and see, even though they're stronger than me, our objective would not be to defeat the United States or Israel, but to endure and survive and wear them out. But then maybe we can show them that wouldn't be good. That could come at a really high price for Iran if they chose that path. Do you think they might?
I mean, first of all, you have to accept that, these are Shia. They're Shia, and they have a culture and they have a history of sacrifice and of enduring immense hardships. I mean, at various times during the Umayyad period in the region, the Sunnis laid down a law that any Shia that went to the mosque, the first occasion you lose a finger, then the second occasion more fingers, then your toes, then your hands, and then your feet. And they still went on going to their mosque. They have an extraordinary resilience. These are the people that suffered through Karbala. They've had 1,000 years of persecutions. They do know how to bear. They have a completely different character from Westerners in, that they understand, the idea of sacrifice for your nation, for your state. I mean, I know you have it a bit, but it's not in the same degree that they have a readiness to undertake great sacrifices. So I don't think, I heard him saying, "Oh, they're begging me to sort of negotiate." He's just twisting it. Iran's position has been consistently that, oh yes, we are always ready to engage in diplomacy, but we're not prepared to give up our nuclear program, and we're not prepared to discuss our ballistic program, and we're not prepared to, if you like, sever our links with Hezbollah or other states or other movements in the region. So, and of course, Trump says no to all of that. It's got to be zero enrichment. You've got to give up your ballistic missiles. It's not going to happen. He knows, I mean, well, I don't know if he knows, but some people in Washington surely understand this. And when I came before a long time ago, as I say, to try and explain this to your defense secretary at the Pentagon, I didn't see him, but I explained some of it to the chief of staff. I saw the defense secretary walking up and down, but I mean, I didn't speak to him. But I said, that this is how it's organized in Iran. And, you do a major attack on Iran, you may find that devastates Israel. This is the system of deterrence, which they've been preparing for 20 years or more. And that, was not even addressed in his comments. He didn't, it was just, we're going to attack Iran and they're going to, be crying for mercy.
Right. And you mentioned earlier in this broadcast that a lot of this stuff, especially with these protests, just magically seemed to start at the same time Trump and Netanyahu were meeting in Mar-a-Lago, and all the things that have happened since that. Trump made that statement there I just showed you a minute ago yesterday on Air Force One that we were thinking about many options, things that we could do. Trump had previously said before that, if there's a red line, if they kill protesters, we may go in to help the protesters, which was kind of ridiculous on face value, but certainly reports anyway that a lot of protesters have been killed by whatever means. You mentioned some of the possible attacks that could have happened, that could have been spawned to set up that way. All that being aside, you had, I think it was yesterday, the biggest supporter for military action outside of President Trump in the United States, and that is Lindsey Graham, went on to just almost with a bloodlust thirst for an attack.
This tyrannical regime needs to end. We need to end this for the good people of Iran and for our own selves and the people of Israel. We need to take this guy down. He needs to leave standing up or laying down. I don't care. And if we can pull this off, it'd be the biggest change in the Mideast in 1,000 years. Hamas, Hezbollah, gone.
Yeah, it may be a big change, although maybe not the one he was thinking. Let me just ask you, what do you think would happen if Lindsey Graham gets his way and his golfing buddy Donald Trump, who he definitely was strongly advising to go and attack Venezuela, and in the days before he attacked Venezuela, Lindsey Graham went on, almost said nearly the identical thing, that Maduro can't survive. We had 15% of the Navy, and if he's still in power, then we are humiliated, etc. Trump took action on that. Given that he said that, Trump did. He's now saying this. What do you think would happen if Trump listens to him and there is a military strike against Iran?
Well, I think a military strike is very likely. I'm not saying that it's unlikely, despite what I've said to you about the dangers of it. And in fact, before the strike in June, I was in Iran and I was interviewed on Iranian state television, then the main broadcast on this. And I said, there will be an attack on Iran and it will be a decapitation strike. And they came back to me sometime later and said, well, how did you guess this? How did you know this? And I explained, it was deduction. It was nothing. I have no privileged information. And I think it's quite likely this will happen because of the domestic circumstances in Israel and because of the domestic circumstances in America. And I think the domestic circumstances in Israel is that the situation for Netanyahu is getting much worse. He has these cases against him, and the legal view in Israel, not me, but in Israel, the legal experts say that if these cases come to completion, he is likely to be convicted. If he's convicted, then he has to go to prison because that was the arrangement. But also, on top of that, there are these new cases, the Gattagate, whereby members of his office have been shown to be being paid large sums of money by Doha during this period. And the question is being asked, well, for what were they paying? What did they want that they were paying? There's no dispute, really. They've admitted that they were being paid by Doha for some time. So we don't know what for. And the question being raised in Israel is, if he knew, why did he not stop it? And if he didn't know, why didn't he know? And why didn't he resign? And senior people like Naftali Bennett, Boogie Yalon, the former defense minister and prime minister, are using very harsh language. They're using the word treachery for what's been happening. So he's in deep trouble. And also because there are elections coming up this year, and he needs to win them. And he needs to win them by having a big victory, something major. And he's always hankered after bringing America into a war with Iran, which they imagine America has secret weapons and resources that no one can imagine, and it will be completed. And most of the defense security officials are lying quite low, quiet. We follow the Hebrew press very closely, and they murmur their concerns about an attack on Iran, but the mood is in favor. It would be wildly popular for him for the elections, a successful attack on Iran. The majority of Israelis want one. The majority in Congress in the United States would like an attack on Iran. There is a big support amongst the political class in America for an attack on Iran. And also Trump would like a successful attack on Iran to say, look, I've made peace for the whole of the Middle East. We've gone through this and we've done this, and, midterm elections, I shall expect you to vote for me. So, there is a reason to believe. So I do think that there is a real possibility of an attack on Iran. But I'm just saying, I'm not, pretending to have
right.
great
foresight,
but I'm saying this could be
evidence
a much bigger war than you are expecting. Much bigger war. And do you think that Russia and China are China's already said we will not sit still if there is an attack.
What has China said on that regard? I actually have not seen that.
He said, they have said, we will not sit on our hands, to use that old expression, if there is an attack on Iran. And I think that there was a Chinese technology that probably cancelled the Starlink connections, plus Russian hardware.
Let me just ask you a question. Let's just say that and there has been some success from the Israeli side, especially that sometimes they can get a decapitation strike successfully launched. They actually got quite a few of those. What would happen in your view? And if I could just kind of end this section on here, if they got a lucky shot and the Ayatollah was not paying attention or they were able to come across with enough strike power anyway, and they took him out. So they succeeded at getting the regime destroyed, meaning the Ayatollah. What would that cause in Iran? Would that cause the emergence of, the Shah's, whatever his prodigy coming in and join? Would it cause some Western power to rise up and take over that would be friendly to Israel?
No. We know pretty well that, although I don't know the details, but we know that a successor is nominated, has been sort of, is in the process. There would not be a gap. If he was killed tomorrow, and a new supreme leader will be sworn in very quickly. And the country would accept that. They don't have any hankering for, there was a time, and this is where, there was a real difference during Rafsanjani's time. They tried to do a sort of neoliberal economic projects. They removed subsidies and tried to make them all market friendly and have open markets, free markets and things. And it was a disaster. And the economy has never really properly recovered from that period, which has added to this this economic malaise, which is real in Iran. But ultimately, the idea of the Rafsanjani and others that there was a way of looking to the West is over. From even the Azeris, the merchant class, they are all looking to Asia now. They're looking east. If you say, well, America is the greatest market in the world and you can't ignore it, I think they look at you and they say, well, do you know what's going on in Asia? Do you have, this is just growing like crazy. And so, there's been a shift, a pronounced shift. There was quite a strong reformist component in society. I don't think ever more than about a maximum sort of 20%, of which only a tiny proportion would favor regime change or the overthrow of the government, but were always wanting, always looking to westwards. But now it's moving and looking towards Russia and China.
Yeah. So to me, that just shows that there's almost no prospect that even if they're militarily successful, Netanyahu and Trump, that anything good is going to come out. And it could, as you say, and I agree with you militarily, could it be an explosive, not just a repeat of June, but something much worse from our perspective. But I guess we're just going to have to wait and hold out. Listen, in the last few minutes that we have here, I don't want to let you go before I ask you something else that's really also kind of up front and center that Trump also mentioned in that same Air Force One press briefing when he talked about renewed his claim that he's going to seize Greenland.
If we don't take Greenland, Russia or China will take Greenland, and I am not going to let that happen.
Is there any deal they can offer you? Either like
yeah, sure. I'd love to make a deal with them. It's easier. But one way or the other, we're going to have Greenland.
What do you make of that? Because this whole obsession by Trump with Greenland, because polar ice is melting and there's more ships going in on there. What does that matter when you look at the Arctic? You look at an actual map of that, and you see there's international waters that go through there. No one can stop international traffic, no matter what country they're from, to include ours. What do you make of this obsession with Greenland? And what do you think would happen if he made good on it? And I think there's a chance that he would.
I don't want to be frivolous, but I think much of it is because he'd like to be able to claim he's the only president in recent years that has increased the size of the United States territorially. I don't think that it goes much further than that. Does anyone really in Washington believe, this is, there's only the little coastal areas. The rest of it is just, kilometer deep ice. You can't mine it except at huge expense. And, it's just not practical. So you can do a little bit here or there. I mean, look at the tiny little patches of green there. It's
right.
It's not, and you remember, I mean, this is what's sort of paradoxical. When he went to Alaska, I predicted at that time, and I said, listen, why have they chosen, why has Putin agreed to go to Alaska for this meeting at Anchorage? I said, because I bet you that what he's going to do is going to say, look, here we are, Trump, we're in the Arctic, and there are huge riches here, and we can share them, and you can be part of it, and we'll do joint operations with you in the Arctic area on oil and gas. I don't think they're going to dig up rare earths from Greenland. It's not practical. But I mean, this was offer. I mean, I don't think, Putin, of course he's not thinking. And, they say, I mean, and look at this picture you put up and say, we can't have a neighbor that is hostile to us. Well, you look up at the Bering Strait. How far is that? How far is close? You're already neighbors with Russia.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't really make much sense, I think, in that way. I think it's just, part of the way in which Trump likes to, present himself and talk to the American public as a figure making America great, making America bigger, making the Western Hemisphere our patch, all of this sort of.
But let me ask you, though, and it's just the last couple of minutes here, what about the impact on Europe? If he makes good on this, and just because Stephen Miller, the deputy chief of staff, basically implied that nobody's going to fight us over this, meaning that if we just occupied it, they're just going to back down. What do you think would happen in Europe if a NATO ally who owns it in Denmark, if Trump actually just occupied Greenland? What would that do to NATO and to Europe trust of the America?
Oh, it would just expose their impotence. And, the fact that they are going to have buyer's remorse for having been so close first to the Biden administration and now to Washington, because there's little they can do about it, in my view. Because America, there's a 51 treaty, the 1951 treaty, which allows America to put a base or bases in Greenland anyway. So it's already there that they can do it. I think America has one base, and that's all military base on Greenland. But I mean, legally, they could just say, well, we're just expanding the 51 treaty basis for it. And I mean, the West, the Europeans can do nothing. What it does do for Europe is leave it naked. I mean, first of all, their whole language was based on, the idea that the end of history, last man standing. The values of the West are prevailing across the world. We are, the light to the rest of the world. And now they're living a nihilist world. And all their claims to having European values, morality, human rights, values, all of this has just been cut away. So they are desperate and in desperate trouble from that, because they know that their own electorates detest them, the elites. And
if you have to go, we're nearly at the end of our time. But if you have enough time for one more question, I'd like to ask you. Do you have enough time?
Sure.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah,
last week, Keir Starmer was addressing Parliament. There was a meeting in there, and he was asked about this by one of the opposition figures about why are you talking about giving security guarantees in the Russia-Ukraine war at the same time we're talking about Trump maybe taking Greenland, and what are you going to do about that, et cetera. And Starmer's response was, look, we need American security guarantees here, and if we cross them on this one here, we may not have it for the other one. Is that a viable decision process?
I don't think it's a particularly strategic or well thought out decision-making process, but you're absolutely right. He wouldn't say anything about Venezuela at all, which was, the kidnapping of a president. He wouldn't say anything about that. And the reason, which was said, privately and quietly, was he doesn't want to anger Trump because he's desperate to try and get Trump to agree to security guarantees for Ukraine. And he doesn't want to say anything that would upset him. So yes, I mean, that's the extent of the spine in Europe. Greenland will probably come to.
Mr. Crooke, surely Starmer understands Trump is never going to give security guarantees of the way he's thinking in terms of against Russia for Ukraine. We're never going to do that. So if he's thinking he doesn't want to anger Trump for this, I think he's going to be disappointed on both sides of the equation.
They are deluded. I mean, they really do think that they've, succeeded somehow. And they think this because, I think Witkoff and Kushner are sort of playing this very carefully, and they have instructions, flatter the Europeans, smooth their feathers, make them feel that you're listening, listen to all they say. But at the end of it, they stay silent on the key issues, and they don't sign the declaration. And what does that tell you? It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So I think, I can't imagine at all that Trump is going to put himself where he's at risk of a major war with Russia. That will not go down well, electorally or any other way in the United States. So, I mean, we will try and steer clear of that. There are people in the US who would advocate that. I'm fully aware of it. There are people in Europe who would love to see tomahawks flying into St. Petersburg and Moscow and provoke the Russians into doing something. But they are really, Russia is trying to carefully calibrate. I was in Moscow last month, and we're having Mayor's talks, and is saying, something that it was actually Abdullahian, the former Iranian foreign minister, put so well in one of his speeches. And he was saying, this was the man that was killed in that helicopter accident. And he was saying, it's such a fine balance between deterrence and diplomacy. How do you tread that line? Because if you go too far to deterrence, you can invite an aggressive response. But if you go too far to diplomacy, you will appear weak and you'll get that response anyway. So this is a very fine line that you have to tread. And that was the case in Iran, but it's the case for Russia too. They're trying to find the right grace. So they've moved to step by step, if you like, deterrence. Rather than go to maximal deterrence, they go, one step up the ladder, the next step, to try and avoid, being pushed into going to maximum deterrence, to nuclear weapons.
And do you think, and I, to the extent that you're talking about trying to thread that needle, really for any side, not just Iran, not just the U.S., et cetera, anyone needs to try to thread that needle. To what extent does having core values actually help you navigate that as opposed to what it appears to me, tell me if you think I'm wrong, that the European leaders don't have any core values that pins them down to any kind of certain value so that they can literally just flow all over the place, which seems like it would make it harder to actually thread that needle. How important are values at the national level?
I would change the wording very slightly because I have negotiated with, groups who are very hostile on terrorist list. I mean, you know, I was dealing with bin Laden long ago and with other groups. I would say, in my experience, you know, forget trust. You never have trust in an international negotiation. That doesn't really exist. The most important thing you can have is, first of all, the ability to listen. Deep listening, I call it. That's the most important thing. But the second thing, and this is the key thing, is integrity. The other side may know that you have limits to your agency, how much you can do, what decisions you can make and not make. But they want to know that you have integrity in passing on their message or indeed in their interaction with them. And seeing that the person opposite you has integrity, even if he's very much opposed and has a different future of the future and a different understanding of history. If you have integrity, I think that is the key thing. And so to parade your values, as the Europeans do, actually doesn't convey integrity. It makes you look hollow and as a poseur and rather feeble. So I don't think, you know, trying to claim values from Athens or Greece has any real sort of resonance amongst people that you're negotiating with. But the sense they feel that when you deal with them, if you say you're going to do something, you are actually going to try and do it. They recognize you may not succeed in the end because everyone has, you know, layers above them to the very top and forces that are unseen that might stop you. But integrity, I think, is more important than trying to pretend to values that people can see are really just, you know, claim values.
Yeah, well, there's certainly a lot of fodder for that as well, and a lot of evidence that that's the case, that there is no integrity, there is no genuine clinging to some of these values, and I think that undermines us across the board, which is, you know, not really helpful trying to resolve any number of these issues here. But we do see what it is, and the more we can expose it here and say, you know, make people understand, the better chance we have to actually get some of that integrity, at least in maybe subsequent elections. We'll have to see how the people feel on that. But in any case, we just want to send people to your conflicts forum. But if you can't get enough of Alastair Crooke, as we can't either, go to his Substack there at conflictsforum.substack.com and continue to look for him. And we'll look forward to having you back on our show here coming up soon.
Well, that's very kind of you, and thank you very much for inviting me to join you today. It was a pleasure.
Always a pleasure for us too. Thank you very much. And just as a reminder, we're going to have Patrick Henningsen coming on later today. He's going to look at the protest portion of this. We're going to do a bit of a deep dive on that. And then later this afternoon, we're going to get Larry Johnson, Larry the shirt CIA Johnson, to give us an update on what's happening with the Russia-Ukraine war. You don't want to miss either one of those shows. We'll see you later this afternoon at 2 and 3 p.m. Eastern. See you then.